Time for the market report. Looks like numbers going up.
That's right, Mike. Numbers are trending in that direction, and we'll get into it. But first, the numbers. What were last week's biggest gains and losses? And then we speak with MSU livestock economist Josh Maples on Mississippi's largest ag export, poultry. What do those markets look like right now? So, markets closed last Friday trending up, row crops getting the best and worst of it, while livestock a mixed bag. Let's take a look. Last week's biggest gain, soybean oil up nearly 5 cents, a whopping over 11% increase from the previous week. Last week's biggest loss, cotton, down nearly 1 3/4 cents, and over 2 1/4% decrease from the previous week. Poultry, the largest ag export of Mississippi, broilers to be exact, and keeping up with production trends this year is MSU Extension livestock economist Josh Maples, who characterizes them as surprising.
So Josh, what are the trends in chicken production so far in 2024?
So it's been interesting, Zach. The chicken production, broiler production has actually been down a little bit, about 1%, which is a bit surprising given what's going on with the feed cost side of the equation. You know, feed is the primary input into broiler production, into the chicken that we ultimately eat. Prices have been down. Corn prices down quite a bit. Soybean meal prices are down quite a bit from where they were a year ago. So if you look at that piece, you might expect broiler production to be up a little bit so far in the first half of the year, but it hasn't been the case. Now, I will say if we look at the annual expectations, so USDA's projections is for broiler production to be up a little bit by the end of the year. So maybe some stronger production in the second half of the year than we saw in 2023, but so far running a little bit below 2023 levels.
So are there differences in production based on bird size?
There are, and that's really been one of the kind of interesting parts to dig into. So if you look at the birds, call them smaller birds, they're about 4 1/4 pounds or less. Production of those birds has been higher than a year ago, about 6% I think is the number. And it's because we've seen some stronger consumer demand for those kind of whole birds, so think rotisserie chickens. We've seen some stronger demand there, so it's led to some higher production at that level. If you look at the birds kind of in the middle, so that 4 to 6 and then 6 to 7-ish pound range, that's where production has been a little bit lower than a year ago. And then if you look at the heavy birds, so over 7 pounds, we've seen production, the share of total broiler production, there's been more of them in that kind of that heavier bird range than we saw a year ago. So that tells us a couple of different things. You know, one, consumer demand drives what goes on in poultry production. That's not surprising, obviously, but I do think we're seeing, given the relatively cheaper feed prices than we've had, we're seeing some of the birds get pushed a little bit heavier. And so that's probably why we're seeing a little bit less in that kind of mid-range or that mid-weight range. And we're seeing kind of some growth on the lighter side, but also the heavier side because it's a little bit cheaper to feed them than it has been.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. Seems like row crops facing a slight turnaround, save for cotton, still falling. Poultry too, moving upwards for now.